9 nannies had come and gone in just 1 month, each defeated by the Millionaire's untamable triplets. But when a fearless young woman stood before their chaos and uttered 3 simple words, "Clean it up," everything changed. What followed wasn't just discipline, but a revelation no one could have imagined. Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? Stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart? Hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The Blackwood mansion loomed against the fading evening light, its tall windows glowing with a sterile sort of brilliance that seemed to mock the chaos inside. Damian Blackwood, the man whose empire stretched across continents, stood at the base of the grand staircase with his jaw clenched tight. His voice cut through the air like glass. "That's it, you're dismissed." A trembling nanny, her uniform stained with grape juice, clutched her bag and hurried out the door without looking back. She was the 9th in just 4 weeks. 9 professionals, each with years of childcare experience, had walked in with confidence and left defeated, muttering about impossible children and an impossible house. From the second-floor landing came a chorus of shrieks and laughter. 3 pairs of tiny feet pounded across polished hardwood, each step an exclamation point to Damian's frustration. Ethan, Emma, and Eli, the triplets. 6 years old, bright as firecrackers, but untamed, unfiltered, and grieving in ways that no adult could seem to soothe. "We broke another lamp," a maid whispered nervously, tiptoeing across the hall. "That's the 3rd this week." Damian pressed 2 fingers against his temple. No one can control them. No one. He wasn't exaggerating. Tutors had quit, nannies had cried, and even the security staff avoided being left alone with the children. Since their mother's death 2 years earlier, the mansion had turned into a battleground of tantrums, broken objects, and endless defiance. Yet Damian, a man who could bend boardrooms to his will with a single raised brow, stood powerless before 3 small faces that mirrored the wife he'd lost. That evening, after the nanny's departure, the mansion felt heavier than ever. Damian sat in the study, papers stacked before him, but his eyes drifted constantly toward the sound of muffled giggles in the distance. His children weren't laughing with him. They were laughing at the storm they created, at the chaos that replaced the silence. The doorbell rang the next morning, sharp and unexpected. Damian barely glanced up from his coffee as the butler opened the door. "Mr. Blackwood, there's a young woman here about the nanny position." Damian frowned. "Another one? Send her away. I don't have the patience for another failed attempt." But the voice that answered was not timid. It was clear and steady. "I'll wait until he sees me." Damian lifted his gaze. Standing in the doorway was Ana Martinez, a woman in her late 20s with dark eyes that held no fear nor hesitation. She wore no expensive suit, just a modest blouse and skirt, and carried herself with the kind of quiet confidence that came from struggle rather than privilege. "You've read the file, haven't you?" Damian asked sharply. 9 nannies gone in a month. 9. Do you think you'll be any different? Hannah met his gaze without flinching. "I don't think," she said softly. "I know." The staff stifled their chuckles as she was led inside. "She won't last a week," one housekeeper whispered, "maybe not even a day." When Anna entered the playroom, the triplets were already plotting their next attack. Juice boxes lined the counter, cookies sat half-crushed on the rug, and Emma was daring her brothers to see who could dump their drink faster. Damian stood in the doorway, arms crossed, prepared to watch another failure unfold. Ethan grinned wickedly and tipped his box upside down, orange liquid spilling across the rug. Emma followed with a giggle, and Eli shoved a cookie into the mess just for good measure. They turned their expectant eyes to Anna, waiting for the shriek, the frantic clapping of hands, the inevitable pleading or threats. But Anna didn't panic. She didn't even raise her voice. She simply pointed at the mess with calm authority and said, "Clean it up." The triplets froze. For the first time in months, silence fell in that room. Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "What? You made the mess?" Anna said evenly. "Now clean it up." Her tone wasn't angry, but it wasn't negotiable either. There was no bribe, no threat, just expectation. Slowly, Emma bent down and picked up the soggy cookie. Eli fetched a towel. Ethan hesitated the longest, but under Anna's steady gaze, he crouched and began blotting the juice. Damian's breath caught. His children, his wild, uncontrollable children, were obeying. By the time the floor was wiped clean, the triplets weren't giggling anymore. They looked at Anna with a strange mix of curiosity and respect, as though they couldn't decide whether to test her again or cling to her firmness. Damian, still standing in the doorway, felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope raw and unsettling. The staff whispered furiously after the incident. "Did you see that? They actually listened." Maybe she bribed them. Yes. She didn't promise them anything. She just told them. Anna, unfazed by the murmurs, crouched down at the triplets' level. "You can play," she said, her voice firm but gentle. "But when you make a mess, you clean it up. That's the rule. Fair?" Ethan crossed his arms, reluctant. Emma chewed her lip, torn between rebellion and intrigue. Eli, the quietest of the three, finally nodded. "Fair?" Damian watched the exchange, stunned. It wasn't just that she'd made them listen, it was how she'd done it. Without fear, without manipulation, without anger. She treated them like human beings capable of responsibility. Something he, with all his wealth and power, had forgotten how to do. That evening, as Anna prepared to leave, Damian intercepted her at the front door. "You lasted one day," he said curtly. Anna tilted her head. Or else has lasted a day." His tone softened almost imperceptibly. "Come back tomorrow." She considered him for a moment, then nodded. "Tomorrow. But I don't take orders, Mr. Blackwood. I take agreements." Damian's brows rose, but he found himself smirking faintly for the first time in months. The next morning, chaos tested her again. The triplets staged a rebellion at breakfast, pouring syrup over their pancakes and smearing it across the table like paint. Anna stood, hands on her hips. "What did we say?" Eli mumbled, "Clean it up." "Good," Anna said. "Start with the table." Ethan groaned. "But that's the maid's job." "Today," Anna replied firmly. "Today it's your job." To Damian's shock, within minutes the syrup was wiped away, the children's giggles replaced with reluctant chuckles of surrender. By the third day, Anna had the triplets helping with chores, turning cleaning into a game of teamwork. They folded laundry, stacked books, even swept the floor. The staff watched in disbelief as the once uncontrollable trio carried out tasks without tantrums. Damian lingered in the shadows, observing. Something inside him stirred each time he saw his children respond to Anna's presence. Yet the stirrings weren't only paternal pride, they were something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Damian found himself pacing in the study. He couldn't shake the image of Anna's steady eyes, the way she spoke, without fear of him, the way she treated his children as more than spoiled heirs. When he finally sat down at his desk, the house felt different. Less cold, less broken. For the first time since his wife's death, Damian wondered if the chaos might actually hold a path toward healing, if only he had the courage to let it. And upstairs, in a quiet bedroom where three children dreamed peacefully, Anna sat, reading by the bedside lamp, her voice low and soothing. The staff whispered again, "She won't last a week." But Damian, listening from the hall, thought differently. She might just last forever. The next morning, the Blackwood mansion woke to a rhythm it hadn't known in years. Usually the halls echoed with shouting, slammed doors, or the sound of something breaking before breakfast. But today, instead of chaos, there was structure. Anna had been up before dawn, quietly preparing bowls of oatmeal and slicing fruit into neat little sections. When the triplets came shuffling downstairs in their pajamas, half asleep and half plotting new mischiefs, they froze at the sight. The table was set with cheerful placemats, spoons laid perfectly, and little notes folded at each setting. Emma squinted at hers. "What's this?" "Today's challenge," Anna said brightly. "Eat your breakfast without spilling a drop. Winner gets to pick the bedtime story tonight." Ethan smirked. "That's easy." "Is it?" Anna raised her brows playfully. Remember, no elbows on the table, no talking with food in your mouth, and if you finish early, you help your brother or sister. Teamwork matters." The children sat. At first they gobbled messily, but Anna reminded them with calm, steady words. She didn't scold or snap. She corrected with patience, her tone never wavering. When Eli tried to sneak fruit to the dog under the table, Anna simply tapped the plate and said, "Clean plate wins." By the end of breakfast, the floor was surprisingly spotless. The triplets exchanged looks, half annoyed that she'd won again, half intrigued that she seemed to always stay one step ahead. Damian entered midway through, expecting the usual battlefield of orange juice puddles and crumbs. Instead, he found his children eating neatly while Anna sipped her coffee at the table as if she'd always belonged there. His eyes narrowed. "How long do you think this will last?" Anna met his gaze evenly. "As long as it needs to." Later that day, she gathered the triplets in the playroom. "We're going to make a story together," she announced, handing them blank sheets of paper and crayons. Emma's eyes lit up. "We draw?" "Just draw," Anna said. "We write a story with pictures. Each of you adds something." Ethan frowned. "That sounds boring." "Then make it exciting," Anna challenged. "Dragons, pirates, superheroes, I don't care. Just make it yours." Soon, the children were sprawled across the rug, crayons flying, laughter bubbling. They argued over plot twists, shouted suggestions, and for the first time in months, their energy was channeled into creation rather than destruction. Damian passed the open door and stopped in his tracks. His children weren't screaming or breaking things. They were collaborating. Emma waved her drawing proudly at Anna, who clapped, as though it were a masterpiece. "We'll turn on you, eventually," Damian muttered when Anna joined him in the hall. "No one survives here long." Anna tilted her head. Maybe no one stayed long enough to show them how. His jaws tightened, unused to defiance, yet there was something disarming in her tone. Not arrogant, not challenging, simply sure. He found himself retreating to his study, unsettled by the thought that perhaps she wasn't just another fleeting presence. That night, long after Damian had buried himself in paperwork, a soft sound floated through the mansion. At first he thought it was the piano his wife once played, but as he followed the melody down the hall, he realized it was a voice. Anna's voice. He paused outside Emma's room, the door slightly ajar. Inside, Emma sat curled against her pillow, tear-streaked cheeks still damp from a nightmare. Anna sat beside her, stroking her hair, humming a lullaby so gentle it carried a weight of comfort Damian hadn't heard in years. You're safe," Anna whispered softly. "Close your eyes, little one. No shadows can reach you here." Emma's breathing slowed, her small body relaxing against the sheets. Anna continued singing, low and steady, until the girl's lashes fluttered shut. Damian stood frozen, his hand gripping the doorframe. The tune stirred something raw in him, memories of his late wife singing the very same lullaby to the children before bed. His throat tightened, a lump rising he couldn't swallow. He hadn't heard that song since the night of the accident, hadn't dared hum a single note for fear of breaking apart. When Anna finally rose from the bedside, she turned and settled at the sight of him in the doorway. For a brief moment their eyes locked, his guarded, hers open and warm. "I didn't mean to intrude," Damian said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You didn't," Anna replied quietly. She just needed to know someone was here. Her words pierced deeper than he wanted to admit. He nodded stiffly and stepped aside, retreating down the hall before his children, or she, could see the moisture at the corner of his eyes. In the study that night, Damian sat staring at the fire, Allah's voice echoing in his head. He had warned her earlier, no one survives here long, but as he remembered Emma's peaceful face, soothed by a lullaby that bridged past and present, he realized something dangerous. Anna wasn't just surviving, she was changing everything. The Blackwood mansion had always been a place of rigid schedules, stiff silence, and rules enforced by fear. Since the death of Damian's wife, warmth had drained from the walls, replaced by order without love. But Anna, with her stubborn calm and spark of mischief, began to bend the walls without breaking them. On a bright morning, the kitchen was no longer the domain of chefs preparing meals behind closed doors. Instead, Flour dusted the counters, eggshells cracked in bowls, and the triplets stood on stools with aprons tied around their waists. Baking, Damian had asked incredulously when he'd wandered in. Anna had smiled without apology. Yes, children should know the joy of making something with their own hands. Don't worry, they'll clean up afterward. Ethan cracked an egg with exaggerated force, yolk splattering. Anna calmly handed him a towel. What do we say? Ethan rolled his eyes but muttered, "Clean it up." Damian blinked. The boy actually obeyed. The kitchen filled with laughter as Emma sneezed into the flour, a white cloud exploding across her face. Ella drew crooked smiley faces in the dough. Anna didn't scold, she redirected. "That's art. Now make 3 more faces so they're even." By the time cookies baked in the oven, the children were covered head to toe in flour, but their eyes shone with pride. Damian lingered in the doorway longer than he intended, the scent of sugar tugging memories of a life before grief had stolen his household. That afternoon, the chaos moved to the backyard. Anna handed the children paintbrushes, jars of washable paint, and a long roll of paper taped across the lawn. "Go wild," she said. "The only rule is, you can't stop until the paper is full." The triplets squealed with delight, dipping brushes, splattering colors. Ethan painted a dragon breathing fire. Emma drew a rainbow taller than herself, and Eli covered his hands in blue paint to leave handprints everywhere. Damian stepped outside, just as Anna raised her camera to capture the scene. He frowned. "This looks like a circus." Anna tilted her head, unfazed. "Or a masterpiece." Damian opened his mouth to argue, but stopped when he saw Emma's grin. Wide, genuine, the kind of smile she hadn't worn since her mother's passing. His chest tightened. That evening, the mansion echoed with the triplets' laughter as they showed off their messy paintings. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. Damian said nothing, but in the silence of his study, he admitted the truth he dared not voice. Anna was undoing grief with small, ordinary miracles. The transformation reached its first test at the family dinner the following weekend. Damian's relatives, sleek, sharp-tongued and wealthy, filled the long dining table with their polished manners and whispered judgments. The triplets, usually restless at these gatherings, sat unusually calm beside Anna, who had been invited at the children's conversation flowed until one of Damian's cousins leaned forward, his voice laced with disdain. "So this is the new nanny? The maid with opinions?" Silence clamped down. Anna froze, her hands tightening in her lap. She had grown up used to insults, but in this glittering hall, the words cut deep. Before she could reply, Ethan slammed his small fist on the table. "She's not just the nanny, she's family." Emma lifted her chin. "She sings to us, she makes us laugh." "You don't, Alice," Eli added fiercely. "If you're mean to her, you're not welcome here." Gasps rippled down the table. Damian's relatives exchanged scandalized glances. All eyes turned to him, waiting for his reprimand. But Damian didn't speak. His gaze lingered on Anna, who sat trembling, stunned by the children's defense. His chest ached with a strange pride. His children had found their voices again, and they used them to shield the woman who had brought light back into their lives. The rest of dinner passed in awkward silence, the whispers sharper, but Anna no longer felt small. The triplets' declaration had anchored her. Later that night, Damian found himself outside the playroom door. Inside, Anna sat on the rug with the children, reading a story. Her voice rose and fell with gentle cadence, the triplets leaning against her shoulders as if they had always belonged there. He leaned against the wall, his mind a battlefield. Admiration warred with caution, and something unspoken pressed at the edges of his chest. He told himself it was gratitude. Yet when Anna looked up and caught him watching, her eyes meeting his in the dim light, the truth struck harder. It wasn't gratitude, it was something more dangerous. The mansion had been filled with chaos and order, clashing under one roof, but Damian realized with unsettling clarity that the real storm wasn't the children's antics. It was the tension building between himself and the woman who had tamed them. The mansion was unusually quiet that night. The triplets had worn themselves out with Anna's improvised scavenger hunt in the garden and were finally asleep. their laughter echoing faintly in Damian's mind like the ghost of a sound he hadn't heard in years. He lingered in his study, staring at the flickering fire in the hearth, but the warmth didn't touch him. Shadows seemed longer than usual, curling in the corners like He tried to focus on the stack of documents in front of him, but the words blurred. Every time he looked up, he imagined his wife's face, her smile, the softness of her hand, the way she used to hum as she moved about the halls. Damian pressed his palms against his eyes, but it didn't stop the memories. They were relentless. He saw her lying in the hospital bed after the accident, pale and motionless. He remembered standing by, helpless, as doctors spoke in clipped tones. He had been a man who prided himself on control, yet in that moment he had been nothing but powerless. When she slipped away, so did the version of himself that could laugh, love, or hope. He buried himself in work, building his empire brick by cold brick, thinking that, if he made himself untouchable, the grief would not find him. But grief had a way of waiting. It lingered, patient, creeping into the quiet moments like this one. The door creaked softly. Damian stiffened, half expecting to see one of the children wandering in after a bad dream. Instead, it was Anna, her hair loose from its bun, carrying a folded blanket over one arm. She froze when she saw him hunched at the desk, but after a moment, she stepped closer. "I thought you might need this," she said, placing the blanket on the arm of the sofa. "It gets cold in here at night." Damian nodded stiffly, unwilling to reveal the storm raging inside him. "Thank you. You should rest. It's late." Anna lingered, her eyes tracing the untouched papers and the whiskey glass by his elbow. "Sometimes rest doesn't come when we need it most," she murmured, her voice soft but knowing. Her words struck him harder than he expected. For a moment, he wanted to ask how she knew that kind of ache. Instead, he deflected. "You speak as if you've lived 1,000 years." Anna gave a faint, tired smile. "Some years feel like 1,000 when you grow up too quickly." Damian looked at her then, really looked. There was something in her expression, resilience, built from hardship, but also tenderness. Against his better judgment, he asked, "What did you mean?" She hesitated, then sat down across from him, folding her hands together. "When I was 16, my parents were killed in a car accident. Just like that, I went from being the oldest daughter in a noisy, happy house to being the parent to my younger siblings. 2 brothers, 1 sister. No money, no guidance, just me. I worked every job I could find, waitressing, cleaning houses, babysitting, anything to keep them fed and..." Her eyes glistened as she spoke, though her voice didn't waver. "I didn't have time to grieve. I didn't have the luxury. I had mouths to feed and tears to wipe. I told myself if I just kept moving, if I stayed strong, everything would be fine. But at night, when they were asleep, I would cry into my pillow so they wouldn't hear." Damian felt something shift inside him. He had expected a convenient backstory, perhaps something that explained her unusual patience with his children. But this was more than patience. It was survival. He saw in her a reflection of himself. The weight of responsibility, the crushing demand to never show weakness. "You were just a child," he said quietly. Anna shrugged, emotion both weary and defiant. Children grow up fast when they have no choice. Silence hung heavy between them. Damian's chest tightened, his own memories rushing back. Memories he rarely let himself touch. "My father was a tyrant," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. Cold, calculating. To him, love was weakness, and weakness was unforgivable. My mother tried to shield me, but when she left, when she couldn't take it anymore, I was alone with him. Every mistake was punished, every tear marked. I swore I would never be like him, and yet," his voice cracked slightly, though he forced it steady, "and yet I look at my children, and I see fear in their eyes when I raise my voice. Fear of me." Anna leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "You're not your father." Damian gave a bitter laugh. "Aren't I? My wealth, my empire, it came from the same obsession with control, the same belief that if I was hard enough, ruthless enough, nothing could hurt me. But it did hurt me. It hurt them. It hurt Lily, Ethan, Emma, Eli. And I can't undo it." Anna's eyes softened, but there was steel in her tone. "You can't undo the past, but you can change the present. That's what your children are begging for. Not perfection, not an empire. Just love. Consistency. Presence." Her words ignited something raw in him, but his defenses rose. It was easier to lash out than to admit the truth. You speak as if you know everything about love, as if you've solved grief itself. But don't forget, you're here because I hired you. This is a job, a paycheck. Anna flinched, the words cutting deep, but she didn't back down. She stood, her voice shaking with fury. Do you think that's why I'm here? That I put up with whispers from your relatives, glares from your staff, tantrums and chaos just for money? Damian, your children don't need more wealth. They need love. They need someone who looks at them and sees children, not burdens. And if you can't see that, then you're blinder than you think. Her voice echoed in the vast study, reverberating against the walls. Damian's jaw tightened, guilt clashing with pride. He wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the truth in her words left him hollow. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Anna turned, her hand trembling as she reached for the door. Good night, Mr. Blackwood. Her tone was formal now, distant. When the door closed, Damian sat in the silence, his chest heaving. He stared at the fire until his vision blurred. Her words repeated in his mind, relentless. They don't need wealth, they need love. He dropped his face into his hands, for the first time in years feeling utterly undone. The next morning, the household bustled with its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface, something had shifted. Anna moved through her duties with quiet efficiency, but the warmth she normally carried felt dulled. Her laughter was absent, her eyes lowered when Damian entered her room. The triplets noticed immediately. Why isn't Miss Anna smiling? Emma whispered as she pushed her cereal around the bowl. She always smiles in the morning, Ethan added, frowning. Damian sat at the head of the table, his untouched coffee growing cold, listening to their small voices with a heavy heart. He had spent most of the night pacing his study, haunted by the look on Anna's face when she told him his children needed love. He had lashed out because she was right, and because admitting it meant acknowledging the years of silence, anger, and distance he had let seep into his family's life. When Anna brought in their lunches, Damian cleared his throat. Anna, a word? Her spine stiffened. She set the bags down gently, then followed him into the hall. He closed the door behind them, silence pressing between them. For a moment, he was the same man who commanded boardrooms and brought empires to their knees. But here, facing her, he felt stripped of all armor. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice quieter than usual. Anna crossed her arms, her expression wary. For which part? The accusation, or the fact that you believe your wealth excuses everything? The sting of her words was deserved. He exhaled slowly. Both. I was wrong. You were right about my children, about me. I've been blind to what they really need. Her eyes softened, though her guard didn't drop. Words are easy, Damian, but children don't believe words. They believe actions. Her truth cut deeper than any corporate betrayal he'd ever known. Then, I'll show them. And you, if you'll allow me. Before Anna could respond, a shriek erupted from the kitchen. They rushed in to find Eli standing on his chair, tears streaming as milk spilled across the table. Emma froze, while Ethan clutched a napkin, torn between helping and hiding. Normally, Damian's instinct would have been to roar, to demand order, but Anna's words echoed in his mind. He crouched to Eli's level, his voice steady. It's all right. It was an accident. We'll clean it together. The children blinked in surprise. Eli sniffled. You're not mad? Damian shook his head, gently wiping the boy's face. No. Everyone makes mistakes. Even me. Anna watched, silently, her lips parting in shock. For the first time, Damian realized that small acts of patience could build bridges stronger than any empire he'd created. That afternoon, he found himself wandering the garden where his wife once loved to sit, roses still blooming under careful care from the staff. He remembered the way she had held Lily, her voice soft as she hummed lullabies, her eyes bright with love. He had promised her, silently, on the day she died, that he would protect the children. But he had mistaken protection for walls, mistaking discipline for discipline. When Anna appeared, carrying a basket of paints for the children, Damian finally spoke. When she died, I didn't just lose her, I lost myself. I thought if I kept everything in order, if I built higher walls, nothing else could touch us. but it only made us colder. I can see that now. Emma paused, her expression unreadable, then placed the basket down. Grief builds cages if we let it, but children, they're not meant to live in cages. The word struck him harder than he could say. He nodded, his throat tight. Thank you for reminding me. The days that followed tested his resolve. The triplets continued their antics, muddy footprints through the toy tower. Angry tried patience, but instead of anger, Damian tried patience. He laughed, awkward at first, but the sound grew easier. Slowly, the children began to seek him out, not just Anna. Ethan asked him to help build a toy tower. Emma tugged his sleeve, wanting to show him a picture she had drawn. Eli climbed onto his lap without fear. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mansion, Damian overheard Anna reading a story in the playroom. The children were curled up around her, their eyes wide with wonder as she animated the tale. He leaned against the doorframe, his heart aching. She wasn't just teaching them joy, she was teaching him too. But guilt still gnawed at him. He wondered if it was too late to mend what years of coldness had broken. When Anna caught his gaze, she didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. There was a flicker of something, hope, perhaps, that kept him standing there a moment longer. That night, Damian found himself in his study again, staring at the fire. But instead of whiskey, he held a sketchbook Emma had left behind, filled with drawings. One page showed stick figures, 3 small ones holding hands, with a taller man and a woman with long hair. Above it, in clumsy letters, Emma had written, "Family." Tears blurred his vision. He realized that grief had been his excuse, but it no longer had to be his prison. His children deserved better. Anna deserved better. And for the first time, Damian Blackwood vowed he would be better, not as a CEO, but as a father. The morning sun broke through the tall windows of the Blackwood mansion, but the light felt harsh, intrusive, almost cruel. The day that should have begun with laughter and the smell of breakfast was instead stained with whispers, nervous glances, and the crumpled tabloids spread across the dining table. Millionaire CEO hires low-class nanny. Blackwood fortune entangled in scandal. Who is Anna Martina? Gold digger or guardian angel? Damian sat at the head of the long oak table, his jaw set like stone, his eyes scanning the headlines he could not ignore. His hand tightened around the paper until it crumpled, but no matter how hard he gripped, the venom of the words seeped through. Across from him, Anna served the triplets their bowls of oatmeal. Her face was pale, but her movements were steady, determined not to let the outside world shatter the children's morning. Emma hummed softly as she stirred her spoon. Ethan asked for extra sugar, and Eli tried to sneak his juice before eating. They were still innocent to the ugliness printed on those pages, but Anna's silence betrayed the weight she carried. Damian opened his mouth to speak, but Anna cut him off before the words could form. "Near," she said softly, her voice breaking even in its restraint. "Not in front of them." Her gaze lingered on the children, and Damian followed it, realizing what she meant. They had endured enough loss, enough upheaval. They didn't deserve to carry the shame of adults too proud to protect them. But the storm couldn't be kept from the walls for long. By noon, Damian was summoned downtown to a private meeting with his board of directors and senior partners. The air inside the skyscraper's conference room was electric, buzzing with tension. These were men and women who had stood beside him through mergers, acquisitions, and battles for dominance in industries across continents. Yet now their loyalty faltered, not because of a financial loss, but because of one woman who had dared to bring warmth into his mansion. Blackwood. Samuel Kent, his most seasoned partner, began with a sneer, tapping the tabloid with 2 fingers. "What in God's name is this?" Damian's brow furrowed, but he stayed silent, waiting for the barrage. Another voice joined in. 9 nannies fired in a month, and suddenly this waitress-turned-nanny manages to stay? The press is calling it an affair. Investors are nervous. We cannot afford to look weak. Pressed again. "Your reputation is everything," Samuel pressed. "Do you understand what these rumors are doing to us?" "To you." Damian's hands, hidden under the polished table, clenched into fists. He had spent decades building an empire that could not be shaken by markets, rivals, or even government. Yet now the empire trembled. Not because of weakness in its structure, but because of love trying to bloom in its cold halls. "You need to let her go," another partner declared. "Fire her, cut ties, restore control before this spins further." The words echoed like a verdict. Damian left the meeting with a storm inside him, one that refused to settle. When he returned to the mansion, he found Anna waiting in the foyer. She stood tall, but her eyes were glassy, her resignation letter folded neatly in her hands. "I won't be the reason your empire cracks," she said before he could speak. "I won't let your children grow up watching whispers and pointing fingers follow them everywhere." Damian shook his head. "Anna, this isn't your fault. They're vipers. They would twist kindness into scandal no matter what." Her lips trembled, but her voice was steady. "It doesn't matter what the truth is. The world already believes the lie, and your silence," she faltered, looking at him with a depth that pierced him. "Your silence tells them they're right." The triplets appeared on the staircase above, wide-eyed. Emma's small voice carried across the room. "Daddy, is Miss Anna leaving?" Anna closed her eyes as though the words stabbed her. She knelt, opening her arms, and the children rushed into her embrace, clinging to her as if she were their anchor in a storm. "Hey, I don't want to go," Anna whispered into their hair, "but sometimes grown-ups have to make choices they don't want to." Ethan shouted, his fists clenching. "You're family now. You promised you'd stay." Eli's lower lip quivered, and he buried his face in Anna's shoulder. Damian's throat burned. He had faced enemies across the globe, but never had he felt as helpless as he did watching his children sob into Anna's embrace. The words that might have saved her stayed lodged in his chest, trapped behind years of silence and fear. Anna kissed each child on the forehead, whispering promises they didn't understand, then rose to her feet. Her suitcase was already packed, sitting by the door like a shadow. "Goodbye," she said softly. When the door closed behind her, the sound reverberated through the mansion like a death knell. Ethan spun toward his father, eyes blazing with betrayal. "Why didn't you stop her?" Damian had no answer. The mansion had been silent before, but now the silence was unbearable. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of wealth, nor the grief-filled void that had followed his wife's death. This silence was raw, heavy, suffocating, born of absence, of children's hearts breaking in plain sight. That evening, the triplets refused dinner. Emma pushed away her plate, Ethan stormed off without a word, and Eli curled into his chair, staring at the empty seat where Anna had always sat. The staff moved about like ghosts, avoiding Damian's eyes, whispering among themselves about the curse of the house that had driven yet another caretaker away. Damian wandered into his study after the children had gone to bed. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls, lined with books his wife had once chosen. He sank into the leather chair, staring at the flames, replaying Anna's words in his mind. "Your silence tells them they're right." She had been right. He hadn't defended her at the gala. He hadn't silenced the tabloids. He hadn't stood before the world and declared her innocence. His silence had cut her deeper than any cruel headline. Upstairs, the children huddled together in Emma's room. Damian found them when he climbed the stairs much later. All three were curled under the same blanket, clinging to one another. Emma's tearful whisper reached him in the hallway. "Daddy should have made her stay." His chest constricted. For the first time in years, Damian felt powerless. Not as a CEO, not as a millionaire, but as a father who had failed to protect the people who mattered most. Days blurred into one another. The tabloids feasted, spinning stories of Damian's affair with a woman from the slums. Business partners demanded statements, some threatening to pull out of deals if he didn't restore his dignity. The empire he had built loomed over him, demanding allegiance while his children walked through the mansion like shadows, their laughter gone, their mischief replaced by silence. Everywhere Damian turned, Anna's presence lingered. The piano keys Emma had once played under her guidance, the storybooks left half open in the nursery. The scent of fresh cookies she had baked still clung faintly to the kitchen air. The house had become a mausoleum of memories, louder in her absence than it had ever been in her presence. One night, Damian sat in the music room, staring at the piano. He pressed a single key, the note ringing sharp and hollow. He remembered the night Anna had sung Emma back to sleep, her lullaby carrying through the halls, soft yet powerful. It was in that moment Damian understood. Olivia Letitia had not disrupted his home, she had saved it. And he had let her walk away. The weight of it settled on him like chains. For all his wealth, for all his power, he had been too afraid to choose love over reputation, too afraid to stand against the world for the one woman who had restored his children's laughter. The silence stretched, heavier than ever, but beneath it, a vow formed in his heart, one that burned brighter than any headline, stronger than any empire. He would not stay silent again. The breaking point had come, and Damian knew if he did not fight now, he would lose more than Anna. He would lose the family she had brought back to life. The Blackwood mansion stood like a fortress of glass and stone, but inside its walls silence reigned heavier than ever. Days had passed since Anna left, and the absence of her laughter, her patience, and her song weighed down every corridor. The children, once mischievous whirlwinds of chaos, now drifted through the house like ghosts, carrying an ache they couldn't put into words. Damian noticed it in every glance, every step. Ethan no longer staged prayerful rebellions. Emma stopped humming lullabies in her sleep, and Eli sat silently in corners, clutching the small wooden soldier Anna had given him. The staff moved about cautiously, whispering as though the walls themselves might shatter if their voices rose too high. And yet, the outside world was far from silent. Tabloids raged on, still painting Anna as a scheming opportunist. Headlines blared accusations. The partners who had once applauded Damian's strength now called him weak. But beneath all the noise, a single ripple was about to change everything. It began with a phone screen. One of the junior staff members, who had always admired Anna's way with the children, had secretly recorded a video weeks earlier. In it, Anna sat cross-legged on the nursery floor, the three children surrounding her. The camera, shaky and unsteady, caught Anna's warm smile as she placed her hands gently over the triplets' little ones. "Peep after me," Anna's voice whispered. "We are stronger together." The children's voices, fragile but firm, echoed hers. "We are stronger together." She leaned closer, her eyes shining with the kind of love the mansion hadn't seen in years. "No matter what the world says, no matter who laughs, we have each other. And that makes us stronger." The triplets giggled, and for the first time in the video, Emma reached up, hugging Anna tightly around the neck. Ethan followed, stubborn at first but quickly giving in, and Eli's small arms joined them, all three collapsing against her chest. The final frame showed Anna closing her eyes, whispering one last time, "Stronger together." The video had been saved quietly, forgotten until now, but when it resurfaced online, it exploded across every platform imaginable. Millions watched, millions shared, and millions commented with awe. Nanny, who healed the Blackwood triplets. A scandal, an angel. You can't fake that kind of love. Hashtags trended. Stronger together, stronger angel. Hero Nanny. Reverse narrative flipped. Where once Anna had been mocked, she was now celebrated. Where once Damian's name had been ridiculed, it was dragged into a storm of questions. Why had he let her go? Why hadn't he defended the one person who gave his children back their laughter? Damian saw the video late at night in his study. He hadn't meant to look, but the headlines kept flashing on his phone until one thumbnail caught his eye. Anna's face, glowing with warmth, his children wrapped around her. His hand trembled as he pressed play. The moment, Anna's voice filled the room. Damian's world cracked open. He replayed it once, twice, 10 times. Each time the words seared deeper. We are stronger together. The truth was undeniable. Anna had given his children something he never could, healing. She had soothed their grief, restored their trust, and taught them to stand as one. Damian's heart twisted as he watched Ethan's laughter, Emma's embrace, Eli's wide smile. He remembered those days, vividly, the brief period when the house had felt alive again. And now it was gone, because he had chosen silence when he should have chosen her. His empire suddenly seemed worthless. What good were skyscrapers, contracts, and billions when his children's eyes were hollow and the woman who had saved them was gone? The next morning, Damian made his decision. When he entered the grand dining hall, the children looked up with dull eyes, expecting another silent breakfast. Instead, he surprised them. "Get dressed," he said, his voice carrying a resolve they hadn't heard in months. "We're going into the city." Ethan frowned. "Why?" Damian paused, his chest tightening. "Because I have something to say. To the whole world." By noon, a press conference had been announced. The Blackwood name, once synonymous with power and wealth, was now trending again, this time with a question mark. Reporters swarmed, cameras lined the stage, and millions tuned in live streams to see what the infamous CEO would say. Damian stood at the podium, his dark suit immaculate, his posture rigid, but his eyes weary. Behind him, the triplets sat together, their small hands linked. Their presence was no coincidence. Damian wanted the world to see them, not as heirs, not as pawns, but as children. He cleared his throat. For a moment, silence filled the air. Then, with a steadiness that surprised even himself, he began. "I have built an empire with steel, with money, with fear. I thought that made me strong. But the truth is," his voice faltered, and for the first time in his public life, Damian allowed vulnerability to show. "The truth is, I failed at the only thing that truly mattered. I failed my children." The room buzzed with shock. Cameras flashed furiously. But Damian didn't stop. "My wife passed away. I let grief turn me into a stranger in my own home. My children needed love, and I gave them silence. They needed laughter, and I gave them walls. And when someone came along who gave them back their joy, I stood silent while the world mocked her." He swallowed hard, his eyes finding the cameras as though searching for Anna herself. "Her name is Anna Martinez, and she is not a scandal. She is not a gold digger. She is the reason my children smile again." Gasps filled the room. "We taught them 3 words I will never forget. We are stronger together. Those words saved my family, and for that, I owe her everything. More than my wealth, more than my reputation, I owe her my gratitude." The triplets shifted behind him, their little faces glowing with pride. Emma even clapped softly, and the gesture melted the room. Damian took a deep breath, finishing with a final, devastating truth. "Behind me, but I won't make that mistake again. My children are my world, and Ana Martinez gave them back their laughter." Silence hung for a long moment. Then, like a wave, applause filled the hall. Not polite, but thunderous, raw, unstoppable. For the first time in his career, Damian wasn't applauded for deals or dominance. He was applauded for being a father. Far away, in a modest apartment on the edge of the city, Anna sat frozen in front of the television. Rosa, her roommate, turned the volume higher, tears filling her eyes. Anna tried to look away, but Damian's voice pulled her back every time. "Escape them back their laughter." Her lips trembled. She had left to protect her dignity, to shield the children from scandal. But hearing Damian admit his failure, not as a CEO but as a man, pierced through every wall she had built. For the first time since leaving, Anna allowed herself to hope. The applause from the press conference spilled into the streets, into news feeds, into homes across the country. Clips of Damian's confession replayed endlessly on television and online. The once feared CEO, whose name had been etched in power and dominance, now stood revealed as a grieving husband and a flawed father who had found courage in truth. For the first time in years, Damian felt lighter. Not victorious, not untouchable, but human. Yet the most important eyes of all were the 3 pairs staring at him from the side of the stage. Ethan, Emma, and Eli had not left his sight since he began speaking. Their small hands, still clasped together, trembled as though waiting for the world to collapse around them. But when Damian turned and offered his hand, they ran to him instead. Emma's arms clung to his waist, Ethan buried his face against his father's side, and Eli's voice cracked in a whisper only Damian could hear. "Daddy, you told the truth." The words pierced him, more powerful than any headline. For years, he had demanded perfection from others while hiding his own weakness. But in that moment, kneeling to embrace his children before millions of viewers. Damian knew truth was the only legacy worth leaving. The conference ended in a storm of cameras and questions, but Damian ignored them all. He lifted his children into the car himself, ignoring the chauffeur, his mind set on one thought: finding Anna. Back at the mansion, the atmosphere shifted. Staff who had once whispered in fear now exchanged hopeful glances. The triplets, still buzzing from the press conference, demanded to watch the video again. Damian stood behind them, his chest tightening as Anna's recorded voice filled the room once more. "We are stronger together." Each replay was both a balm and a blade. He could not rest until those words were no longer just a memory. That evening, the city lights blurred outside his window as Damian scoured reports, public records, old employment logs, leads from journalists who suddenly painted Anna as a heroine. Hours passed, but he refused to give up. Every path led back to the same modest neighborhood where she had been living quietly since leaving the mansion. When he arrived, it was raining, a steady drizzle that blurred the neon glow of streetlights. He parked his sleek car far from her building, unwilling to draw attention, and walked the final blocks alone. Each step was heavy with humility. This wasn't the march of a CEO. It was the walk of a man who had everything, yet discovered he was nothing without the woman who had healed his. Through the cracked hallway window of her apartment building, Damian heard laughter. Not the cold, polite kind from boardrooms, but genuine, unstrained laughter. He climbed the stairs, pausing outside her door, his hand hovering over the wood. From inside, Anna's voice drifted, low and warm, reading a story aloud. He could picture it, her sitting cross-legged with the triplets at her side, the same way she had always done. The image nearly broke him. During courage, Damian knocked. The laughter fell silent. Footsteps approached. The door creaked open, and there she was. Anna stood with wary eyes, her hair damp from the rain, a sweater slipping from one shoulder. Behind her, the children's faces peeked out, wide with hope. "Damian," she said softly, as though the name itself carried too much weight. He swallowed, his voice rough. "Anna, I saw the video. I saw what you gave them, what you gave me." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "I didn't give you anything, Mr. Blackwood. I gave them what they needed, and when the world turned cruel, you let me walk out that door." Her words sliced deep, but he didn't flinch. He nodded instead, accepting every ounce of truth. "You're right. I failed. I chose silence when I should have chosen you. I let fear of reputation destroy the only happiness my children had found. But I won't hide behind excuses anymore." Anna's eyes flickered with both pain and disbelief. "Do you know what it felt like, to be treated as if I was less than them? Less than her?" Her voice broke. "I never wanted to replace your wife. I only wanted to help 3 children who were drowning in grief." Damian stepped forward, his tone steady but vulnerable. "And you did. You gave them back their laughter, their courage, and you gave me something I never thought I'd feel again: hope. The world sees you as a hero now, but I don't care about the headlines. I care about what my children whisper at night when no one hears. They whisper." Ethan's small voice broke in before Anna could reply. "We want you back, Miss Anna." Emma tugged at Anna's hand. "Daddy told everyone the truth. Please, don't leave us again." And finally, Eli, the quietest of the 3, held up his wooden soldier. "He's not strong without you." Anna's resolve cracked. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at the children, their tiny faces pleading with a desperation she couldn't ignore. Damian lowered himself to one knee, rain dripping from his shoulders where it had soaked through his coat. He looked not at the children, not at the world, but at Anna alone. "You didn't just save them, Anna, you saved me. Without you, I am a man with money but no soul. Without you, I am a father who fails every day. Please, give me another chance. Not as their employer, not as the master of this house, but as a man who wants to build something real with you. With them." Anna's chest rose and fell, her heart torn between fear and longing. For so long she had built walls to protect herself. But now, watching Damian kneel in humility, hearing his voice stripped of power, she felt those walls begin to crumble. Slowly, she extended her hand. Damian took it, his grip firm yet trembling with relief. The triplets erupted in cheers, wrapping themselves around both of them, their laughter echoing down the hallway. For the first time since their mother's death, the family stood united, not by blood, not by wealth, but by love that had been fought for, broken, and rebuilt. Outside, the rain fell heavier, as if washing away the last remnants of grief. Inside, the warmth of forgiveness lit a fire that no storm could extinguish. And in that moment, Damian knew. The world might remember him as a millionaire, but his children would remember him as the man who chose love over pride. The viral clip had given the world a story, but what mattered most was the truth it gave them. A truth sealed not in headlines, but in the embrace of a family finally made whole. The storm had not relented since Damian left the press conference. Sheets of rain slashed across the windshield as his car wound through narrow streets, far from the marble towers and glass walls he usually inhabited. The city felt unfamiliar here, raw and unpolished, yet somehow closer to the truth than the sterile perfection of his mansion. When the driver offered to fetch an umbrella, Damian waved him off. This was not a journey he could delegate. This was not a moment he could control with polished words or measured commands. For once, he needed to be stripped of the armor that had defined him for years. He stepped out into the downpour, the cold instantly soaking his tailored suit. Each step toward the dimly lit apartment building felt like penance, an act of humility for every time he had chosen silence, every time he had let pride dictate his choices. By the time he reached the cracked door at the top of the narrow stairwell, water dripped from his hair and ran down his face, indistinguishable from the tears he refused to shed. He knocked. The door creaked open, and there she was. Anna stood in the doorway, her eyes wide, a simple sweater hanging loosely on her frame, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look even younger, yet far older than her years. The exhaustion etched across her face told him she hadn't truly rested since leaving the mansion. Damian. Her voice was barely above a whisper, steady yet guarded. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Damian dropped to his knees, rain pooling around him, his breath visible in the cool air. He had knelt in boardrooms to sign contracts worth billions, but never had he felt the weight of humility as he did now. "You didn't just save my children," he began, his voice rough, trembling. "You saved me." Hannah's eyes flickered, pain rising in them like a tide she'd tried to hold back. "Don't," she started, but he raised a hand, stopping her. "I don't want you as their nanny," he continued, his words breaking past the wall he had built inside himself. "I want you as their family." The confession hung in the air, thick with everything unsaid. The rain hammered harder against the windows, as if the sky itself bore witness to his surrender. Hannah shook her head slowly, disbelief clouding her face. "Damian, don't say things you'll regret. I've been mocked, humiliated, called names in your world. Your silence nearly broke me. I won't survive it a second time." Her voice cracked, and for the first time Damian saw the full depth of her fear. Not of him, but of being shattered once more by promises that could dissolve under pressure. "No," he admitted, his voice softer now. "I let fear rule me, fear of scandal, fear of weakness. But the truth is, I was never strong without you. Without the laughter you gave them, without the warmth you brought into that house." Hannah looked away, her arms crossing tightly around herself. "And what happens when the whispers return, when the tabloids print more lies? When your board tells you to choose again?" Damian shifted closer on his knees, ignoring the cold water soaking through to his bones. "Then I choose you. Every single time. No contracts, no employment, no walls between us. Just you, me, and the children. Not as a duty, not as a scandal, but as a family." Anna's breath shuddered, her eyes shimmering with tears she tried to blink away. "I can't risk their hearts again. Do you understand what it did to them, to me, when I walked away?" Damian reached up, his trembling hand hovering just inches from hers. "I know, and that is why I am not here to hire you back. I am here to ask you to come home, not to work, to live, to be the piece of us we cannot be without." Suddenly, small footsteps thundered down the hallway behind her. Ethan, Emma, and Eli appeared, their pajamas rumpled, eyes wide with hope and fear. "Daddy," Emma whispered. Damian turned, his heart breaking at the sight of them. Their tiny hands clutched the frame of the door, their lips trembling. "Don't leave us again, Miss Anna," Ethan pleaded, his voice raw. "Please." "Being you," Ellie added, his quiet words cutting sharper than any accusation. Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks as the children ran forward, wrapping their arms around her waist, their sobs filling the hallway. She bent to hold them, her body shaking with the force of their need. Damian watched, his own chest aching, before lowering his head. "I failed you all once. I let pride steal the only light in our lives, but I swear to you now, I will never let it happen again." Anna looked at him, her arm still around the children. Her heart screamed to believe him, but fear whispered louder. "Damian, love isn't a promise whispered in the rain. It's proven in every choice, every moment. Can you truly choose us above everything else?" His answer came without hesitation, his voice breaking into a vow that felt like it had been waiting years to escape. I choose you. Not because I need redemption, not because I need to repair my image. I choose you because, when you walked out that door, you took my soul with you, and I can't breathe another day without it." Silence followed, heavy and sacred, broken only by the sound of the children's sobs softening into hiccups. Anaya closed her eyes, her body trembling with both resistance and longing. She wanted to push him away, to keep the walls intact, but when she opened them again, she saw more than the millionaire CEO she had once worked for. She saw a man stripped of his armor, a father willing to kneel in the rain for love. And it undid her. She reached out, her hand brushing against his wet hair. "Damian." The word was not rejection, it was surrender. Damian felt the faintest spark of hope ignite in his chest at the way his name fell from her lips. He rose slowly from his knee, standing at eye level with her now, yet still feeling smaller beneath the weight of her forgiveness. Anna wiped her cheeks quickly, trying to steady herself. "I don't want to be your charity. I don't want to be your scandal. If I stay, it must be as an equal, not as a nanny you rescue." Damian nodded instantly, his jaw set with conviction. "Then, as my equal, as their mother in every way that matters, as my partner in every choice, every battle, every day ahead." The triplets looked between them, their small faces glowing with cautious joy. Emma tugged on Anna's sleeve. "Please say yes. We don't care about the whispers. We just want to laugh again." Anna's defenses cracked completely, tears streaming freely as she pulled the children tighter. Damian stepped closer, his voice shaking with rawness. "I love you, Anna. Not for what you gave them, not for what you gave me, but for who you are. Strong, fierce, tender. The only person who ever stood up to me and reminded me what it means to be human." Her breath caught, her heart pounding against her ribs. She searched his eyes, desperate for any flicker of insincerity, but all she found was truth. For the first time since her arrival in the Blackwood mansion, she believed him. Still, fear lingered. And when the world comes after us again, when they print another headline, when your empire's at stake? Damian closed the gap between them, his forehead nearly touching hers, his words spoken with absolute clarity. "Then let it burn. Empires can be rebuilt, families cannot. I would rather lose everything I owned than lose you." The children gasped softly at his words, sensing the weight of them. Tears turned into trembling laughter, the sound fragile but real. She shook her head in disbelief. "You really are terrible at making speeches, Damian, but you're very good at breaking walls I swore would never fall." And with that, she leaned forward, her lips brushing his softly, hesitantly, as though testing whether the world would shatter at the contact. It didn't. Instead, the children's cheers filled the air, Bernona's wrapping around both of them in a tangle of joy and relief. Damian pulled back just enough to whisper against her lips. "You've saved us all, Anna, not with obedience, not with perfection, but with love." Her reply was simple, broken, and everything he had prayed for. "Then let's stop surviving and start living." That night, the mansion did not sleep. Laughter echoed down the halls again as Anna tucked the triplets into bed, Damian standing by the door, watching the scene with a reverence that humbled him. The children clung to her hands, refusing to let go until promises of tomorrow were whispered through the dark. Later, in the quiet of the study, Damian poured 2 cups of tea instead of his usual glass of scotch. He handed one to Anna, his hand brushing hers. "From now on, we face everything together. No secrets, no shame. Just us." Anna smiled through her tears, her voice steady at last. "Then let's make a home worth more than any empire." And for the first time in years, Damian Blackwood, the ruthless millionaire CEO, felt whole. Not because of wealth, not because of victory, but because, in a storm of rain and tears, he had confessed the only truth that mattered. They were no longer broken pieces bound by duty. They were a family, chosen and forged through love that had survived whispers, scandals, and pride. And as Damian held Anna close that night, he knew the world could strip him of everything, but it could never take away the confession that had set them free. The Blackwood mansion looked nothing like the cold, echoing palace it had once been. 1 year had passed since rain had drenched Damian and Anna's confessions outside her tiny apartment, and in that span of time, the home had transformed into something unrecognizable. After spilled down the staircases, the triplets' voices echoing through every corridor. Colorful crayon drawings decorated the once sterile walls. The grand piano in the parlor no longer stood as a dust-covered monument to silence. It sang daily, often with Emma's small hands plunking out notes while Anna hummed nearby. The kitchen, once a sterile space used only by staff, had become the heart of the house. Pancakes sizzled on Sunday mornings, flour dusted little noses, and Damian himself, once unapproachable and precise, had been caught flipping eggs with exaggerated flair to make his children squeal with delight. The change was not instant, nor was it perfect. There were still moments when Damian's temper rose, when fear of losing control tempted him back toward old patterns. But Anna's steady presence reminded him that true strength came not from control, but from compassion. He had learned to bend, to listen, to laugh with his children rather than demand from them. The triplets, once infamous for driving 9 nannies out of the house in a single month, had grown into spirited but secure children. Ethan had developed a love for drawing dragons and knights, his sketches scattered across Damian's desk. Emma had blossomed into music, spending hours learning lullabies that reminded her of the song Anna had sung the night of her nightmare. And Eli, the quietest of the 3, had discovered joy in building towers and puzzles, his quiet focus admired by all. Anna's role in their lives had shifted too. No longer Miss Anna, the outsider the world ridiculed, she had become their anchor. The children called her Mom without hesitation, their voices laced with pride. She was no longer the employee who had once faith-spilled juice with a calm, clean it up. She was Damian's wife, his partner, the heart that had restored their home. Together, Damian and Anna launched something greater than themselves. The Blackwood Foundation for Children in Grief was born, not out of obligation, but out of the family's own scars. They knew too well the emptiness that came when a parent was lost, when laughter faded, when silence crushed fragile hearts. The foundation funded counseling programs, music therapy, and scholarships for children who had suffered loss. It offered a haven where grief was not hidden but healed. The gala, marking its first year, had drawn the city's elite, yet it was not the chandeliers or the champagne that mattered. It was the sight of children in bright clothes, laughing freely, their voices rising above the murmur of society's powerful. It was the sight of parents, single or remarried, finding community in shared struggles. That night, Anna stood on the stage in a simple yet elegant gown, her hair pinned back, her eyes glistening as she addressed the crowd. She spoke not as a socialite, but as a woman who had once stood in a dim apartment, scraping pennies to survive. Her voice carried both strength and humility. "The foundation exists because love is louder than loss," she said, her hands trembling only slightly as she gripped the podium. "We know what it is to lose a parent, to feel laughter stolen from a home, but we also know what it is to rebuild, to choose joy again. That is what you are supporting tonight. Not statistics, but children who deserve a chance to laugh again." The applause thundered. Damian, standing at the edge of the stage, felt his chest tighten with pride. He had built empires, signed contracts worth millions, commanded boardrooms with ease, but nothing had ever filled him with the same awe as watching Anna speak with fire and grace. And then came the moment that would live forever in his memory. The triplets, supposed to be sitting quietly with their tutors in the front row, suddenly dashed onto the stage. Ethan tripped over his shoelaces, Emma tugged her dress higher so she wouldn't stumble, and Eli, clutching his stuffed bear, followed behind them with determined steps. The audience gasped, a murmur of amusement rippling through the crowd. Anna turned in surprise, crouching instinctively to meet them. Emma grabbed the microphone before Anna could react, her small voice carrying across the speakers. "She's not our nanny," she declared, with the certainty only a child could hold. "She's our mom." The room erupted in a mix of laughter, gasps, and applause. Ethan chimed in immediately. "And she makes better pancakes than Dad." Eli, shy but determined, leaned into the mic with his bear tucked under his chin. "We love her." Anna's tears spilled freely as she pulled them into her arms, her shoulders shaking with both laughter and sobs. The audience rose to their feet in thunderous applause, not for the wealth or the grandeur of the event, but for the purity of three children declaring what mattered most. Damian stepped onto the stage then, his usual composed demeanor shattered by the raw emotion burning in his chest. He placed a hand gently on Anna's shoulder, his voice low but audible to those closest. This is the gaze locked on her and the children clinging to her dress. This is the legacy that matters. The gala may have been filled with the city's most powerful, but in that moment, it belonged to them, a family forged not in perfection, but in love. After the gala, the whispers that once mocked Anna turned into praise. Newspapers that had once called her the low-class nanny now wrote of the woman who healed the Blackwood family. Viral clips of the triplets shouting their declaration of love circled the internet, captioned with phrases like, "This is what family means," and "Wealth can't buy what love builds." But for Damian and Anna, the true reward was not in headlines. It was in the quiet mornings when the triplets piled onto their bed, demanding stories before breakfast. It was in the sound of giggles during impromptu pillow fights. It was in the evenings when Anna played piano and Damian, awkward but trying, sang along until all four of them burst into laughter. One evening, months after the gala, Damian sat in his study, staring at a framed photo of his late wife. His heart no longer ached with the same suffocating grief. Instead, it held a gentle peace. Anna entered quietly, carrying hot tea, and set it beside him. "He would be proud," Anna whispered, her hand brushing his shoulder. Damian nodded, his throat tightening. "She would be grateful that someone like you came when I was too blind to see what I needed." Anna shook her head, her smile soft. "No, Damian, you saw, eventually, and when you did, you chose us." Her words settled deep in his heart, sealing the truth he had once been too afraid to embrace. He was no longer a man defined by empire or control. He was a husband, a father, and a partner in something far greater than wealth. The foundation flourished. Families found solace, children discovered healing, and laughter returned to homes that had been silenced by grief. At each event, the triplets took pride in helping, Emma teaching children simple songs, Ethan drawing superheroes to hand out, Eli offering his bear for hugs to those who needed comfort. The world still whispered at times, but now, the whispers no longer held power. Damian had discovered that true strength was not in shutting out the world, but in standing openly with those he loved. On the anniversary of the gala, the family gathered once more for the foundation's celebration. This time, Damian himself stood at the podium, his voice steady as he looked out over the crowd. "A year ago, I believed legacy was measured in wealth and power, but I was wrong. Legacy is measured in laughter, in the voices of children who learn to hope again, in the families who find strength in love." He paused, his eyes shifting to Anna and the triplets standing proudly by his side. "My family taught me that." The audience rose to their feet in applause, but Damian barely heard it. His gaze lingered on Anna, whose smile shone brighter than the chandeliers. Later that evening, as the family left the event, the triplets skipped ahead, their laughter echoing through the night air. Damian wrapped an arm around Anna's shoulders, pulling her close. "Could you hear that?" he murmured. Anna tilted her head. "Nobody could have noticed her loud sound of our legacy," he whispered. "It's not in buildings or contracts, it's in their laughter." Anna leaned into him, her heart full. "Then may it never fade." And it didn't. Because the Blackwood family had built something no scandal, no whisper, no empire could ever destroy. A legacy of laughter, born from grief by love.